So hello and welcome to another Valorant map analysis video. Today we are going to be talking about how to defend on the map Bind, and I have the meta comp for us here. That is Viper, Sova, Skye, Jett, and Astra. Jett sometimes being replaced by Raze as well. And so yeah, this is the meta comp. And one thing you will notice about this meta comp, which I think is quite interesting for defending on this map, is that there are no sentinels. Now Viper is kind of a controller sentinel hybrid, but there are no traditional sentinels. Sometimes Sage is involved as well on this map at the pro level, but for most teams there is no sentinel, and that kind of gives us a clue as to what is going on in Bind, and we'll explain why pro teams go that route. But first things first, let's look at the choke points on Bind, and I mentioned this when I was talking about attacking, but if we do look at the choke points that are on this map, it's sort of multi-layered really in Bind, and this is where the main advantage for the defenders comes from, is that really you can see that the 4 choke points that I've isolated there, but also there's kind of secondary choke points as well. There's the entrance to shower here. There's perhaps, this first entranceway if you're, sort of coming up towards here as a defender, which you can get to a lot of the time. You can even make that a choke point, really. Not as much, but you can. Obviously, the entrance into Hookah is often a choke point as well that, a lot of people will defend. And, you can even sort of make, whether it be long there or the first entrance to Garden, that can be a bit of a choke point as well, both of them. So you have, a lot of sort of different choke points that you can stop attackers at, and it makes Bind a pretty defenders sided map. But then if we look at sort of the 4 main choke points before the attackers are actually onto the site itself, what you'll notice is that they are, and I mentioned this in the attackers, they are all very small choke points for the most part, or very dangerous for the attackers to just rush through. And this has led to a meta on Bind where I said on the attacking version of this video that you have to default on this map because a push up a certain way just won't go well for you, and that is an advantage for the defenders. Of course, it's so easy to stop a rush on this map because the choke points are so small and they are in such confined areas. You think about if someone's trying to come out of shower, just like imagine sending like a molly into this. They aren't getting through anytime soon, and they don't really have anywhere to go but quite far back away from the choke point. They can't sort of mill around very close nearby. The same is true on short. I mean, this is dropping off a ledge off of Hookah, which is always a nightmare scenario for any attacking team to have to drop off to a ledge. And the same is somewhat true for Garden as well. A pretty confined area here as well, with a relatively small choke point that can be stopped quite easily. So it's just always, a defender's paradise when it comes to stopping pushes on this map. And I think if some agents were a little better, we could see a slightly different meta, because I think things like, if KO I think was a bit better, maybe instead of Skye you might see KO because of his nade and just again more ability to stop anyone pushing at any point. It's just so simple to be able to do that, and that really is playing into the defender's advantage. So you will want agents on this map that have things like mollies or a Sova shock dart or something that just put into an area to stop anyone rushing in. You'll want that all the time because it's so useful on Bind in general when we're defending, and it will really make it so easy for you to be able to stop a push. Now, it's kind of interesting because I've started with Ascent and Bind, obviously, alphabetically the first 2 maps, and they're probably 2 of the easiest maps to defend on. So Ascent was a 3-4 map, as in those 3 ways for the attackers to start, and then leading to 4 choke points. Bind is obviously a 4-4 map, and that there's 4 ways for the attackers to go, and there's 4 main choke points that they then have to deal with. So, a 4-4 map obviously leads to some interesting decision points as the defenders, and obviously the teleporter as well, and the lack of a coherent mid makes Bind a very interesting map and quite different to the others in a way. Because of that, there is no real danger of being caught off rotating through spawn unless something has gone pretty horribly wrong. This is going to be very safe for you almost all the time because the attacker, is going to have to somehow manage to, slip the net of getting all the way around past site, which probably isn't going to happen. And so really when it comes to common strategy on Bind and what we're thinking about, obviously you're probably going to have 1 player for each of the different choke points. That's going to be pretty standard on this map. And then your 5th player is kind of, an interesting choice in what you want to do. I know that some people have come up with some strategies of you can put different agents like here towards the back of B site, or maybe even closer to this, and maybe it would be a Sova, right, with a certain lineup that could hit different parts of the map. You just learn different lineups from this random spot back here, or somewhere maybe back of B site, something like that, so that you can just quick rotate, so that you're kind of playing it a bit more neutrally. Obviously, you can sort of determine, maybe if you were playing a Sentinel, you could maybe have like your Sentinel and Viper on one site, and think that that's a pretty safe bet that they'll be able to stop a push, any quick push, and get delay off, which it will be good. And put 3 on the other side. That's something that you can definitely do as well. So there is definitely options for you available. I do think that this is a map, again, kind of similar to Ascent, where I don't think there is too many hard and fast rules, because generally you will have the advantage most of the time, because Bind it's not really a defensive sided map. But this, I think, is why pro teams have gone towards this kind of setup, is because they want to be better at attacking. Notably, what we'll see in pro games when they're attacking is that they will just poke and prod a lot to try and get as much of that utility out of the defenders as they can, so that then they can push. Because, as I mentioned, the utility usage here is very easy to stop push. Something like maybe a snake bite, down here, and the 2 or 3 players that are trying to come A short, all of a sudden they have to stop, right? They can't, because the snake bite is covering every single bit that they could maybe go through, right? And add on to like a poison cloud onto that, and they're just not going to be able to get through, right? Like, that's the kind of thing that's happening a lot on this map when it comes to defenders. And really, this is to your advantage. This is what you should be trying to do as much as you can, is making these choke points, again, as difficult as you can for the opponents to get through, because on this map it is going to be difficult for them to push through that choke point. Now, you might think that that's, the default stance of most defensive teams, defend the choke points. But as we go on to other maps, you'll see that I won't actually say that that's what you should do. And that's why people can struggle to defend on those maps, because you shouldn't be doing that. But on Bind and on Ascent, as we saw yesterday, it is probably just the best thing to do, is just to defend your choke points, to sort of play a bit more normally in most cases. Now, as I've mentioned, you will have a very safe rotation a lot of the time through your spawn, because there isn't really a great way for attackers to punish that in any sort of way. And so that's good. That's a bit of an advantage for you as well. What I will say is, pushing out on this map and getting aggressive on this map, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. But again, I think similar to Ascent, this sort of map design, I think it's kind of interesting that, these are some of the earlier maps that came out, that they're kind of more standard. They're kind of more defenders defend, attackers attack. We're not getting too experimental with it. You can push through on these maps, but I think against good teams that understand Bind and know how to play it, it won't work out for you well, because, as I said, attackers should probably be defaulting a lot on this map. So generally, pushing out as a defender and getting very aggressive, unless it's a coordinated push, probably isn't going to go too well for you if you're playing against good opponents. But obviously, depending on your rank, depending on where it is, how you're playing, how the game's going, you could potentially find some success doing that. One thing that I will say about Bind is, I did mention, not getting too aggressive, but I think one thing that you can do, and, as I mentioned before, there's kind of multiple choke points that you can kind of play on this map, is to not be too afraid to, peek some of these angles where, that initial choke point might be. So, for instance, Sky here, can most of the time pretty safely, be able to peek out here. Same is true on Showers, that you can take this sort of first choke point and then very safely and happily fall back, after maybe you've done some damage, or, you've got that information that they might be outside of Shower or something like that. You can do this pretty safely, particularly on these outside parts of the map. And the same is true in Hooker. Of course, you can defend the Hooker door as well. And I think, it can be quite nice to use that 5th player to be like an extra support on Hooker, or get aggressive on one of the 4 choke points, because you only have to defend 4. This last player, as I mentioned, is kind of free to do what they want. And I think it would be nice, and I think a lot of the time it might be pretty successful for you to say to whoever that 5th player is, like, hey, let's push on either one of the extremities or Hooker. I don't think it works as well up A short, because like, if you get to this point and you're feeling pretty aggressive, you don't know which way to go a lot of the time. But out of these positions, I think it can be okay to be like, we're gonna really fortify this area, or we're gonna really fortify this area, which could be a read of like what your opponents are likely to do or what they've been doing before. But getting aggressive on these areas, where there's kind of multiple good choke points to catch the defenders and stop them from advancing from, I think that can be a very good use of your 5th player as well. And one quick thing I want to say, and I've mentioned this, I think I mentioned this in the last one as well, is that we haven't really seen anyone, I don't think, like, use the teleporter in a way that I think is, like, genius. So, like wow, I haven't seen, like, too many incredible teleporter strategies. Obviously, the sort of middle teleporter here that goes from one side to the other quickly is, it is in your control at first, and it is just past the choke point. So you will have initial control of it, and that obviously does lend to potential use of that teleporter to your advantage. As I say, we haven't really seen anyone do that. We might not until the Yoru rework. If Yoru is reworked into something good, then maybe we can revisit this and be like, oh, you can do these really cool things of, teleporting in and jumping back out and just constantly playing with this teleporter as something that you can use. That is something that you could do with, a Yoru potentially, and maybe you put your two players in hooker and you'd have Yoru go here and you just really take control of this space early, have two players on A and just like push this as a three. Those are the kind of things that maybe we could see in the future, but for now obviously I think it doesn't really work, but hopefully one day it will. So now let's talk about retaking on A site. And A site is quite interesting, I think, for retakes in general, because obviously there's two main spike locations. It's somewhere around here, behind the big box on A, or it's towards the triple boxes here. And what's interesting about both of these spikes is that they allow, easy access for sort of one angle, but not the other for the common attackers' angles. Obviously, attackers will normally sort of retreat back towards either A short or showers, and this spike, can be seen from A short very easily, but showers not so much. And if we go to the other one, same thing's true, where it can be seen from showers pretty easily, but not so much from A short. And so that does make, a bit of a difference in terms of where the spike's planted, and might give you clues as to where the attackers, might be. However, retaking on B I don't think is nearly as easy, and the reason that I say that is because of this choke point here, and this little box area here that I'm going to get, because if you're coming from CT, which often you will be, and it's not like a site where you have two very, available options to you to go, you can go to two places and feel, like there's options there. You have to cross this no matter what way you're going. You have to cross this little space, and obviously the attackers know that, right? And that's going to cause a bit of a problem for you, because how are you going, like often when you're retaking B from your spawn, it will be how are you going to get past this area. This really is the problem area anytime you go, and so you need to think about that and think about how exactly you're going to do it. Now sometimes they'll smoke it off, which means that you can sometimes take a risk and maybe try and get past the smoke and sort of towards elbow, but sometimes they won't, and you'll really have to think about what am I going to do, because often there'll be someone in hooker, which is like a vertical angle. There might be someone like down here, there could be some people back here as well. These are all common positions that attackers might play. They can also play anywhere towards actually like in the tube or just around the site in general. And when you swing this corner, it's not going to be easy for you because of that vertical element as well. You're gonna, if two people do swing, you're probably gone, and they can be on your left, they can be on your right. It's not an easy thing to have to come from this area. Now, I will say it is a bit easier if you can get past and into elbow. I think that this is a better route to take in general when you're trying to retake this site, because what this angle does is often the players in hooker, unless they're set right in this corner, which you'll be able to see pretty early on. As soon as you round this corner, you should be able to see them if they are in that very tight corner. Then if they aren't there, you should be able to be free of hooker seeing you, at least for a time. And often, look at the places that I've highlighted. They often aren't actually looking directly at this, which normally means that you can get further onto site than perhaps they're expecting. And particularly if you're in a small situation, like a 2v2 or 1v1, you can get very far in and cause some havoc, which is quite nice. Now, unfortunately, again, this spike location, sort of anywhere on this front bench side, isn't great for you, because it's very, very easy for the defenders to retreat, and you can't go really and chase them. It's very easy for the defenders to just retreat here or be in hooker, and if you do have to come from CT side, it's going to be a bit of a nightmare for you. And the same really is true coming back from your own spawn as well. Problem with coming this way in hooker is you have to do the drop, the dreaded drop that the attackers, now you have to do that drop, and that's not going to be easy either, because again, They could be anywhere from that drop point, and you're screwed basically. It's always very hard, and you can. And this way, the problem is here is that this is a very long route to take. Right, it's going to take up a lot of time to come all the way round garden, and even so, again, you're dealing with the same choke points that the attackers had to do, which I just mentioned aren't easy to push through anyway. So it's never going to be easy for you to, push through either of these choke points from a rotation side either. So yeah, it's going to be very difficult to retake on B site a lot of the time. And so, this is the thing. Bind, and I put a in this way as well. They're very standard maps. They're easy sites to hold a lot of the time, and that's where you'll get most of your round wins. And they aren't so easy to retake because, if it's a hard site to take, it's probably a hard site to retake as well. That's generally how they tend to design these things. I haven't really been able to talk too much about like interesting strategies here because there isn't too many interesting strategies. I'd say focus on the choke points, focus on keeping them behind those choke points, and you'll probably be doing pretty well. I think both of these maps that we've gone through so far are pretty defenders heavy sided. Not as heavy perhaps as they used to be, as people have got used to attacking on them. But I do think, you should have the advantage of the defenders, and as long as you can keep them back of those choke points, then you should be good.